Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our panel discussion tonight on building resilient supply chains with blockchain. My name is Sophie Rifkin, and I am the Senior Associate Director at the NYU Stern Center for Sustainable Business. We are delighted to host this virtual program tonight and are very thankful to our panelists for being with us, and thankful to all of you listening in for joining us as well. A few points of housekeeping. Just a reminder that this session is being recorded and will be posted to our website in the coming days. We will have 15 minutes for questions at the end of the discussion. To ask a question, and you're welcome to submit them throughout, please use the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. And now I'm delighted to introduce Tansy Whalen, the Director of the Center for Sustainable Business and Clinical Professor at Stern, who will moderate tonight's conversation. Tansy, turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Sophie, and really a pleasure to have everyone here tonight. For those of you who don't know the Center for Sustainable Business, our mission is to help current and future business leaders embed sustainability core to their business strategy and drive innovation, operational efficiency, employee engagement, and value to society, of course. We work in, we have educational programs, we have research programs with companies, we have events, and we're always happy to have partners. So if any of you are interested in working with us more closely, please feel free to reach out. So before I introduce our terrific panel, I'm really looking forward to the conversation. I just wanted to level set for a minute about blockchain and what it is. So blockchain is a distributed database that maintains a constantly growing list of transaction records. And these records are referred to as blocks. And every block contains a link to the previous block. So in effect, it's an open ledger that captures transaction data between parties in a permanent and verifiable way. So if you're thinking about a sustainable and resilient supply chain, you'd be thinking about the fact that you're going to have records for each stakeholder ranging from, let's say, the farmer all the way to the retailer and even potentially to the consumer. And at each part of that journey, a new permanent block of information is created, which enables you to have more transparency, traceability in your supply chain. I just want to, one cautionary note, right, is that like anything else, garbage in is garbage out. So let's just say you have a sustainable supply chain around coffee and the coffee farmer is not adequately verified that indeed his or her practices are sustainable, but is signed off on as sustainable and goes into the blockchain that way. That then becomes a permanent record as sustainable coffee when in fact it isn't. So we need to be clear that this is a really important tool, but there are other things that one needs to do in order to make it really as effective as it can be. And we're going to hear a lot about this from our panel tonight. So let me move on to the panel. And I'm going to, you've seen the photo and the titles of each speaker. So I'm not going to repeat that. I'm going to ask each of them to do a brief kickoff to introduce their organization. And then we're going to go through a series of several questions and making sure that we have time enough for all of you to speak. So I may be a little bit rude with our panel if we tend to go on too long in the enthusiasm of our responses, to make sure that everybody has a chance to talk and you have a chance to provide your questions. So let's kick this off briefly with Khalid Ferguson, who product marketing manager at BlockApps and also a Stern alum. Welcome, Khalid.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Hey, so yeah, my name's Caleb. As Tansy mentioned, I'm a Stern alum and I'm a product marketing manager at BlockApps. BlockApps basically provides a blockchain platform technology, almost like a piece of software to build and run business networks. It all happens on our platform called Strato, which it runs basically a super enhanced version of the Ethereum protocol, if you're familiar with that. And we've been around for about 5 years now. We help large enterprises, Fortune 500 companies like the ones you see here, Bayer, Ticketmaster, BHP Billiton, use Strato to build blockchain into their business. And I'm excited to be here and hear from the other panelists as well.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Caleb. So let me now ask Mark Hanna, also a Stern alum, CMO of Richline Group, a Berkshire Hathaway company, to introduce his organization briefly.
All right, thank you, Tensi, and thank you very much, everyone, for attending this. We'll hope to make it very interesting for you. So yes, I'm a Chief Marketing Officer of Richline Group. We're part of Berkshire Hathaway. And our attention really to chain of custody, supply chain tracking goes back to 2006 with an original group of software called String. We got very involved starting in 2017, updating what we were doing, utilizing blockchain, which is far, far, far superior and robust. And most importantly for us, it was creating a chain of custody of trust because it wasn't all us inputting every node all the way along the way. So it's technology we believe in. We're in the precious metals and diamond industry. So it's a technology that's important. It might be nascent, but it's incredibly important for the trustability of the products we have going forward. So thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you, Mark. And now let me ask Mark Kaplan, partner at Invisible, not Invisible, if he could introduce his organization.
Absolutely. So thank you all for having me, and thank you all for participating, first and foremost. So Invisible is a sustainable seafood company, and we also built our own whole chain traceability system initially for our supply chains, but have since reapplied that technology to other supply chains as well. Most recently today, we announced and shared the results of our traceability program with Estee Lauder, tracing vanilla from Madagascar all the way through their supply chain to the Aveda brand. This really brings together my background in sustainability, two previous experiences, one leading digital for Unilever's Chief Sustainability Office, and before that was implementing the MFISH initiative for the US Department of State. So that brought together the experiences in the public and private sector, applied those to seafood. I worked with MasterCard at Unilever, brought that together with the current business and created whole chain. So that's me.
Thank you so much, Mark. I understand people are having problems with seeing the speakers. Let us know if you still have a problem with that, but hopefully that's fixed now. Let me now introduce Leandro Nunez, who is Vice President, Product Development and Innovation at MasterCard Labs. Thank you for joining us, Leandro.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name is Leandro Nunez. I'm Vice President of Product Development and Innovation as part of the organization at MasterCard that we call MasterCard Labs, where we de-risk the introduction of new products and technologies to the market, for the MasterCard portfolio. Being one of the initiatives we have here is the MasterCard blockchain, where we developed the use case related to traceability, and more specifically also with sustainability, where we are in the different industries from food, agriculture, minerals, and logistics, freight, and also it's amazing to be in this panel and having one of our partners here with us is Mark from Invisible. That we have a real life blockchain production with them, and I'll be happy to discuss and learn and share insights with everybody.
Great. Thank you so much, Leandro. So let's kick off the discussion. I'd like to start with a broad question about what trends are driving the need for blockchain in your industry as it relates to promoting sustainability and resilience to shocks such as COVID and climate change? And maybe Mark Kaplan, maybe we could start with you, because I know you've done a lot of thinking about COVID-19 impact on supply chain, a lot of work on this around traceability. So love to hear your thoughts about these broad trends.
Sure. So while it started really before COVID, I think the pandemic has really highlighted some of the weaknesses in supply chains. and food in particular has been well documented with a lot of the shortages and outbreaks in different facilities. For us, this really highlighted the reason why we created Whole Chain as part of creating a seafood business from the outset. As a matter of fact, we'll actually be creating a case study as a result of this, because what traceability to each step of our supply chains enabled us to do was to quickly and in real time react to the nuances in supply chains that are happening at each stage on a day-to-day basis. So particularly things like, given that we're a seafood company, you can imagine a lot goes through Seattle. So with one of the early outbreaks was there, and we process cod, salmon, and halibut there. So what we had to do was advance production timelines in advance, knowing that we had this coming up. We knew the processor, the source, the packaging. So by having traceability to every step of the supply chain, we ended up running parallel processes in terms of packaging, packing, production, printing, which would have otherwise been done in a sequence. And that enabled us to advance our timelines, which are enabling us to then react and actually have product on shelf in advance of when we were expecting to do so, because we're compensating for shortages in other supply chains like beef, pork, and chicken with seafood.
Thank you. And I know, Mark, you're going to talk about this issue more in the next question, sort of more about your specific seafood example, but sort of taking a step back out, like, you know, looking more broadly at the trends, right?
Yeah.
You know, what do you see
so
there?
And this is a lot of what informed us to create the business, was this desire for consumer transparency. Mislabeling, recalls. I mean, the conduct and the realities of the food systems in their opaque supply chains have really created this demand for consumers to have visibility, particularly to the provenance of their commodities. And so knowing that the demand was there for traceability to really enable the consumer to make purchasing decisions in alignment with their values. I think the realities of the food system and being opaque, and the combination of that with the demand, like the heightened awareness of nutrition and the ingredients, and then combined with this overwhelming reality, which I would say is more than a trend. I would say it's like an awakening almost, where people are now really concerned about the values of the companies that are behind the dollars that they're spending. So I think those are all the implications.
Excellent, thank you. Mark, Hanna, I'm wondering if you can add to that perspective in terms of these broader trends driving the need for blockchain around sustainability and resilience. Talk a bit about it from the investor perspective, as well as the customer and consumer perspective.
Yeah, thank you very much. Mark just hit the most important word, which is provenance. It's somewhat, it has been since the very beginning, and I fully agree that the reaction worldwide, and certainly in a business context from COVID, is going to be an expansion of provenance to be sure that the natural world we touch, the health potential, good or bad, from everything all the way up and down the supply chain, is documented and clear. And so I think that the importance of knowing every node in that supply chain all the way till something is safely delivered to consumer has never been more important. I think we were already, also as Mark said, a lot of this started way before this pandemic, that ESG reporting, certainly as you know, Tansy, ESG reporting has become increasingly important, along with financial statements for most public corporations, you know, all the way down to carbon footprint and carbon neutrality and so forth. But I think that impact investing is sort of founded on the principle of good management who's paying attention to the SDGs and the sustainable world are more resilient, are producing more resilient companies. And I think we're seeing that demonstrated in many ways. It's not just maybe, it's not just somebody, you know, writing a nice essay. This is showing to be very, very, very real. And most importantly, as you guys showed at the NYU conference I was at recently, that the markets are supporting it, where some of the impact funds are 17, 20, 25% outperforming the market. So it is very important that if I take this more specifically to our industry this morning, I'm on the board of the industry's sustainability leaders, which is called Responsible Jewelry Council, and it's about everything sustainable and about the SDGs. Well, we had a conference this morning with banks and investors and some of the major investors talking about exactly what the criteria and guidelines might be on the other side of the pandemic to have them more assured that the members of Responsible Jewelry Council and those that get third-party certified are ticking all the boxes, not just a couple of them. So I agree with Mark. It's becoming not just I'll look into that someday. It's becoming a major pressure point right now to where are you going, and what are you doing about it? And in the end, and I'll come back and talk about this next time I share some information, but it's trust and verify. And blockchain is that verification. I certainly don't know of anything better, whether it's third-party audited or whether it's trusted through smart contracts. That verification is absolutely the use of blockchain.
Thank you, Mark. Caleb, I wonder if you could give us a sense from your perspective working with clients, where's the demand coming from? What are they seeing? Why do they, what are the trends that they're responding to around blockchain and sustainability and resilience?
Yeah, totally. I think Mark and Mark both hit it on the head there. Provenance is definitely the key word, and it's where we see a lot of our clients start. I kind of put asset tracking down here because it's a really good, tangible starting point for a lot of our clients, and you can build that true trail of audit. And I think in terms of COVID and the supply chain specifically, I really like that you chose the word resilience, the ability to bounce back. As far as I can tell, not much has changed about demand management since I took ops management at Stern, but the thing you need to really effectively manage demand and respond to a shock like we saw from COVID is quality data from a single source of truth, which is a term that you'll hear a lot of the time. And so having that good quality data is really the benefit that's kind of unfolded out of COVID being around. And then on the sustainability front, I can talk about it more later, but we've definitely seen from our clients an increased interest in putting sustainability measurement and data recording in their blockchain project or program or network earlier in the process than they used to. With BHP Billiton in 2017, we started working with them by tracking precious mining samples, sort of a provenance project alone. But nowadays, we have similar oil and gas companies coming to us, not just looking to do that one thing, but also document, carbon impact and things like that as well. And so totally agree with Mark and Mark there. Single source of truth to get the true provenance is the key here.
Terrific, thanks, Caleb. Leandro, from MasterCard's perspective, and you're seeing the movement of information and supply chains and sustainability and resiliency across huge ecosystems. I wonder if you could give us your perspective on these global trends.
Sure. So it's for all of this. I mean, I'm hearing here. It resonates to me. All of these words are recall, provenance, right? How we get resilience and all of this. So everything we understand in MasterCard that it starts with the visibility of the supply chain, right? And what we do, what we're trying to do in our daily basis here with my team, besides that, I have to explain MasterCard is not only a credit card company anymore. There's the goal to give our partners the ability to scale, right? It's scalability. You said very well at the beginning, we are not a blockchain company only, is a MasterCard, and we don't believe that blockchain is going to save the entire world with all of this. There's a combination of other things that you should put it together. Partnership is something for us. It's extremely important in what we do, every day. we use the blockchain for the blockchain as its best, and we have incredible solutions that we can see here in the panel that we can help them to scale. We come from a culture of over 50 years taking care of governance of networks, helping companies to scale and scale the ecosystem in general through networks, right? Through connecting companies. So it's where we don't want to lose our DNA on that, and we think it's extremely important to the adoption of blockchain to bring this expertise to the ecosystem in general. So we that's what exactly we are doing. So we are getting this as taking care of our partners, understand with them what they need to scale, put real case, use cases in real life, understand this in a way that our clients can start seeing results, and blockchain doesn't become anymore just a sales pitch or a dream or something that's a future. It's here. We can prove it, and it's in production. And clients are start to getting benefits from this.
Terrific. Thank you, Leandro. So I want to ask the panel now to dig deep into some examples of how you're applying blockchain and how is it working? What are the benefits? What are the challenges? And how does it work? Because I think people also really want to understand this at that level. So Mark Kaplan, you had started talking a bit about the sustainable seafood work that you're doing, and maybe you could walk us through that, or as well as any other examples that sort of bring this to life for us. Yeah,
no worries. And what I'll do is I'll walk you through the workflow of how we actually implement this in practice. Because to Leandro's point, blockchain isn't something that most people literally interact with directly. It's through some other device and interface that they interact with the technology. And you can imagine seafood has quite a variety of characters involved in the supply chain. So we typically start out by having a training session, depending on what the environment is like. You can imagine a multi-million-dollar Alaskan fishery has a lot different look and feel than the shrimp farms in India do. And so the form factor of how we onboard our supply chain is very different, but the content's the same. So we teach how to use their mobile devices to enter data. We provide a digital identity card for our producers to scan in their identity. This identity card is typically tied to some kind of a license. So in Alaska, it's tied to their boat license, which is tied to their fishing quota, which is tied to a sustainability metric, which is tied to our requirements. So when we gather data directly from the fishers, that's then shared to the next receiver in the supply chain. And the message is sent very similar to attaching something to an iMessage, the way it looks in our whole chain traceability system. And then once it's received by the next receiver, they authenticate that the information is correct before we write that record to blockchain. And the reason why we do that is to validate that the information is shared as correct and have that next level of accountability. Now, what it also does is it creates a fingerprint between that transaction, right? So then when the products then go from that, call it the cooperative or the fishery, from the fisherman to the processor, we're then able to match up the data that was shared from the processor upstream to where the product is typically transformed from a whole fish into portions, as an example. And if the weight, as an example, doesn't match of what's entered to be sent with what's received, that then gives us visibility that there's a gap in the supply chain. And we actually want to record the incorrect records as well as the correct records, because that then gives us information on interventions that we may or may not need to undergo. And so in order to make this a little bit more usable, what we've also done is because sustainability is also verified based on certain certifications. So we've templatized the key data elements required for Seafood Import Monitoring Program, MSC, Best Aquaculture Practice, Fair Trade, the Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability. And so by conforming the data standards that we aggregate to the industry standards, what that does is it facilitates further interoperability and harmonizing data with our partners. So we're able to get true sustainability measurements out of our supply chain and product measurements. So the next thing that we had to do and how this thing really works is we had to bridge that informal aspect of the supply chain to the formal aspect of the supply chain. So that then the next step that we do when it goes from the typically supply side into the demand side of the supply chain, we have to conform the data to GS1 standards through their EPCIS protocols. And so that then enables us to transfer it into the grocer ecosystem from the supply ecosystem. So there is a bridging function that happens. And what we're going to get to in the next stage, particularly exciting with the fair trade data standard that we've collected from most recently small scale Mexican shrimp farmers in the Baja coast, is moving to payment, to where we're able to match identity with payment and product. And that will give us ultimate insights into labor rights in the supply chain, which is as elusive as ESG measurements has been.
Fascinating, and as a seafood lover, really important to be able to
know what you're putting into your body, right?
Exactly, yeah, and also that I'm not, stripping the oceans, right? So that's terrific.
Yeah. Or financing slave owners.
Yes, exactly. Great, so thank you. So let me turn now to Mark Hanna, who I believe has a slide, as well as to talk through some really interesting pilot project that he's working on.
Thank you. That was a great explanation, Mark. Quite exhaustive and quite thorough. You saved me a lot of discussion. Thank you. Let me sort of simplify. So I'm going to give you an idea of a real-world trust chain program from a supplier. One of our divisions is a major supplier to pretty much every national account in this country. That we are now in a demand situation with some of those major retailers, from Tiffany to Costco, where origin matters, but so does the entire flow throughout the entire supply chain in terms of responsible practices. So I said we had really started in 2006, but where we went to in 2017 is we've created really for the breadth of our industry, from diamonds to precious metals, we've created a system whereby from the time its original origin, which for us mostly means a mine, and you guys probably, unless you really are on my side, you've been seeing lots of articles about the difficulty with mining and everything from human rights to conflict situations. So having our origin, our mine, very specific and very specifically monitored and third-party audited is incredibly important if we're going to start at the very point of origin and say everything from that point through is good. So everything we do goes back to the mine that the gold comes out of, but the diamond comes out of. So in the very simple map that you're looking at there, so this was one of our first pilots. And yeah, our system that we based this on, our protocol, was IBM's Hyperledger. But we took gold from a mine in South Dakota. We had it refined, which means made into fine gold, pure gold, in Salt Lake City. We sent it to our Attleboro facility to be made into fabricated materials. We sent those to our Mumbai facility in India, waiting to create the rings. We got the diamonds out of the mine in Canada. We sent them to Antwerp for cutting and polishing. We sent them to the same facility in Mumbai. We put this together, created diamond engagement rings, sent it to our distribution facility, and then we sent it on to a retailer in Kansas City. So it made its way from the Midwest all the way back to the Midwest in quite a detailed and quite a well done example of how we can keep track of this all the way along the way, how from the beginning to the end, every player in that chain knew where it was and what was happening to it. So our trust chain program does a couple of things very, very specifically, that every member of the supply chain on that product, from the time it comes out of the mine, the retailer that it's eventually going to go to knows it came out of that mine. When the retailer gets it, the mine knows that the retailer got it. And we are very, very careful to make sure that we have a system of trust. And that system of trust then was backed up with the idea that we had third-party verification and audit of this all the way along the path. And we did that with UL. Their auditors verified, as Mark referred to a second ago, that the ins and the outs. I sent it and you got it, and you referring that you got it and moved it on. So we're very pleased that we were able to create a very closed network that we trust very much. And I don't know if you can see down in the bottom corner there, it's kind of hard to read, but we established early on that there are 5 T's that we want to pay attention to, and track and trace is a couple of them, but the most important one is trust. So at the end, that we've been able to document something very clear. Every point along the way has been verified, and to be sure again that at least initially and still at this point, we're about 1.5 years or 2 years into this, that you're not even qualified to be in this supply chain unless you have third-party certification from the Responsible Jewelry Council on every one of your best practices. So we've tried to put together a very clear, very documented, very transparent flow of product, and lots of product, so that in the end, the consumer has the ability to take the retailer's word for it, or actually be able to know exactly everything about it. When in our original program, we actually had this set up with the consumer interface is actually a Google map that you can drill down to scan your product code in and drill down and see every single person that touched yours all the way along the way, and what their responsible credentials are. Eventually, from the, I came out of the marketing school at NYU, so I'm a plug, but that eventually this is great storytelling. This is the kind of storytelling that is truthful, is exciting, is thorough, and is going to be repeated. And that storytelling is very much the foundation of marketing at this particular point in time. So that's a quick example of what we've done with this. And now it's being expanded in a number of ways. We're working with a couple of other very big companies and a couple of other protocols, actually. De Beers Tracer protocol is an excellent protocol, different than ours, but we're working together. And another company by name of Everledger, who is working in the colored stone part of it. So between us and the precious metals, and we're also in the diamonds right now, but between us and the precious metals and these other industry players, we feel we're getting very close to having a very strong industry-wide system that's very true, very believable, and very transparent and documented.
It's terrific, Mark. Thank you so much for sharing that good work. Caleb, let me ask you to talk to us a bit about the energy efficiency work, sort of shifting from products to energy, and share with us what you've been learning in that work.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Those are really great examples of, the types of assets that can be tracked and traced along a blockchain network. But, you can also track other things that aren't so physical. And so one project, for example, that we launched this year that's very near and dear to my heart personally is around tracking energy usage as drawn from these very sustainable co-generator units that create much less CO2 than their non-co-generator counterparts. I am going to just drop a link to it in the chat, but just kind of piggybacking off of what Mark said, one really, really good piece of advice I heard my coworker give a client once was to dream really big, but start small. And I think it's important, and what we do in this project, for example, is start with one product type, one set of small trusted partners, and try to address one standard or one regulation at a time and expand from there. Otherwise, as Mark Kaplan mentioned before that, you do run into interoperability issues head on, and it can be incredibly discouraging because you haven't yet seen that beautiful Google map of all of the information you're looking into. And so in this asset tracking project, we've started with these code generator units. They basically automatically report their readings to a blockchain ledger. And then from there, there's a proprietary calculation that's done to estimate the CO2 reduction that's occurred as a result of using these code generators. But to us and to Greenwatt, the name of the company that's working with us, this is just the first step. We plan to sort of expand this to not just code generator units, but other sustainable appliances, refactorings. You know, you think LED light bulbs, for example. These are the types of things that can be added on to a network after the fact or live while it's in production. But definitely you should start with just a small set of something and, you know, figure out the kinks from there. When Mark Kaplan was talking about the fingerprint technique, the fingerprinting technique before, I think that's very interesting and important because you are going to have, you know, unexpected issues you run into with a new technology. And you don't want to be out there too quickly such that those issues discourage people from wanting to use it more. And let's see, what else about the energy tracking project? Let me check my notes here. That's about it. I can talk about a little bit more of the benefits if you want, but I just sent out the link in the chat so you can browse there as well and let me know any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Caleb. I want to ask Leandro if he can talk a bit about some examples that they've been working on related to the circular economy. And as you know, the circular economy is really about how do you design waste out of a system? How do you create a more regenerative system? I'm also, I just apologize, but I just got an emergency family call. So I'm going to step off after this and turn it over to Sophie Rifkin, who will take us through the rest of the panel. My apologies to the panelists and my thanks to the panelists for participating. And with that, let me turn it over to Leandro and then after that to Sophie. Thank you.
No problem, thank you. So it's very interesting to hear all the stories and in real use case, right, with blockchain and the detail that we go and all the companies here are tackling the, you know, this idea of increased trust, you know, among the parties, and then from there really tackle the use case. And one of this is the circular economy is interesting because you always think about traceability on the sourcing side of supply chain. Sometimes we forget that it's more than that. And I think, Khalid, you said that, you know, sometimes it's just not only the product per se, but also what the container or what you're using to as a transportation of the product, and how this can be recyclable, how we can, you know, tackle sustainability from this perspective. It's interesting to see, you know, projects we're discussing here with cosmetic companies saying, I know I have to use a recyclable plastic in my product, but I don't have the visibility of my tier 2 or tier 3 what they are using, and it's what I call have liability but no visibility, which is dangerous nowadays, right? Because your consumers are telling, you know, you brand, I buy from you, you know, I wanted to understand what you're doing. And so it's cannot be a legal liability, but it's a liability as a brand, and don't have visibility. It's really, you know, it's really complicated. So these companies are going and say, okay, so I want to understand where my plastic comes from. If they're doing exactly what I'm telling them they have to do. It's part of the corporate policies, you know, in the past, they used to say, if you want to supply something to me, you have to follow these rules. And there was a checklist for this brand saying, I'm fine with that. If the company is saying they're doing the right thing, I'm good. Now, this has changed, right? So you have to prove, you have to validate it. You know, everybody's saying here how we do it. The plastic is the same story. So they're going back and saying, I wanted to understand if you're telling me that your plastic comes from the, you know, waste that you have, you know, before. So let's track it. Let's track from tier 4, you know, downstream, and then you go into you get it to my facilities. So we are starting to do that and create sort of a digital credits for the suppliers, saying, so we count on you points and sort of a tokenization of it that, you know, they can use as part of the evaluation of the companies. We also, as part of this adoption, what we need to create it is not only for this use case, but for all, is to understand all of these participants of the solutions, what the benefits they would get, right? It's not only about the brands. It's something that sometimes concerns me when I see companies addressing food traceability or any type of traceability from only the big brand perspective. You know, instead of just doing this for the whole participants. So what we're doing with the circular economy is showing to others that they can get advantage of it. So if the supplier is doing the right thing from the sourcing side, today they supply to that big company, they can be eligible to supply to other companies of the same characteristics. So you start to bring a premium to your product, right? That gives opportunity to expand your business. So that when you bring it just to the tail, the suppliers and even small companies see value of why you're doing this. Nobody's doing this because we are mandating, because a big company is telling you to do, but it's because it's the right thing to do. Second, it's going to expand your business. You're going to open up the doors with other companies that wants to be part of, they want to do the right thing and be ethical with the sourcing they're using. So this incentive model is extremely important. And for circular economy, when people ask me, so what is the key for that? What's the key point for this? Is really, you have to identify the motivations from each one of the participants you have, right? When I was talking to Mark Kaplan the other day, he's saying, oh, I need to make sure that the material that we are using are also recyclable as well. So it's not only, his concern is not only with the seafood, where it comes from, is also what he's doing, to make the seafood to arrive on the shelf to the consumers. So this starts to involve more people into this network, and then you start to see benefits from all of them. And from my experience here, we've been seeing everybody gets on board when they see benefit, right? Directly or indirectly, but when they see benefit. So for the circular economy, if I take a good takeaway here is just don't think about only the use case, but the benefits that you can bring to these small companies that are in this business as well.
Great, thank you so much, Leandro. So just as a brief reminder to those with us, if you have a question to ask, please use the Q&A feature below. I have one more question that I'll ask of the panelists, and then we'll move to the last 15 minutes to questions from you all. So my final question, and we'll start with Mark Kaplan, is what's the future for blockchain and sustainability? What obstacles still remain, and how might we overcome those? And Mark, I know that you have some interesting work underway around the agro biodiversity and also connecting that to some of the sustainable development goals as well.
Yeah. So I think the future of sustainability is actually going to transform itself to being more of a regenerative concept. I think this idea of sustainability has become overused, like the word platform or app. It's just, it doesn't have the same kind of meaning anymore. I think that people have misinterpreted, and I think that the current protests are starting to drive the broader awareness of a broader definition of the concept. So I think that that's going to result in practices also being moved forward as well, and certifications moving from being a voluntary manual process. And I'll get to the technology bit in a second, but there's a bit of a lead up to it. And certifications are going to become more rigorous as a result of this, because they're also under fire for, you know, voluntary sustainability submissions. So if we're relying on logos to call something sustainable, there has to be the rigor behind it. So I think sustainability is going to transform in that sense of being something very regenerative, both from a social standpoint and an environmental standpoint, but then also from an economic standpoint. Sustainable products have been often out of touch to consumers. And I think the accessibility in terms of price and education of consumers is going to increase. And I think technology is going to be one of the keys to doing that. As the broader proliferation of two things: one, the understanding of blockchain and other similar types of technologies, and then as connectivity and the digital divide becomes increasingly narrow, and more farmers and small scale producers become more digitally connected, I think that that's going to be the tipping point for the mass market adoption of, broadly speaking, sustainable products, driving the demand for traceability as a result of people's heightened awareness of the need to connect their values to the products that they're buying. So that's just in summary how I think that's going to happen. And I wanted to also build on the idea of incentives as a result of this, because the question was asked, and two, I think it's an important question to take forward that Leandro brought up. One of the things that we did with traceability was made the commitment to transparency. Traceability without transparency is a very good big data exercise for analysts and big corporations. With traceability, with transparency, you're able to tell stories to consumers and actually let them know who's producing their food or mining their diamond or what have you. And that gives a sense of personal connection to source, but it also gives market access to the producer. And what we've seen by committing to price transparency, which has been the most disruptive element of our business, it hasn't been blockchain or traceability, it's been price transparency with traceability. We were able to define the pockets of value that were otherwise being consumed by big food. And the result has been that our grocer partners are paying less for a higher quality, more sustainable product that's fully traceable. And our producers are making more with market access and transparency to their brand, rather than just being behind the logo of some big company. So that made it a very good bet that the business premise was that big food is dishonest and greedy. And it proved itself, and that's the result of the business case.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Now to you, Mark, Hanna. Do you think we'll see a renewed focus on global sustainability efforts post-COVID? And will this increase demand and for ensuring traceability in sustainable supply chains?
I'm going to pick up on the consumer comment that Mark just made, that we've done quite a bit of work, and I'll come back to post-COVID, but that we did quite a bit of work looking at, is this really important to the consumer? And we started with, we did a study across, we had two different universities, graduate school businesses, do the same study. And we started with asking the question about, would you switch to demonstrated equity or more socially responsible products. And we got almost the same response rate in both, which is 44 and 41. Now, the people that we had over 600 respondents in this, and for the two universities, 65% were alumni. The ages were 25 to 34, so we were targeting this at a millennial. We also ended up with somewhat of an affluent millennial with an average household income of about $100,000. So, but that 44 and 41, once we showed them the trust chain program and showed them the transparency it could provide, that number went to 68 and 71. So we're seeing a delta of 25 or 27% in consumer demand or consumer response based upon our abilities to provide this information. And then we went on, and 93% of the respondents trusted the initiative, and 73% of this group are willing to pay more for it. So we have very positive consumer results showing that, can we do this the way we say we're going to do it? There's a very big market for us to take advantage of, and we plan to do that. This is somewhat of our justification for a longer-term project to make sure this all works. I think, again, coming back to where we first started in this discussion, there's no question to me and to most of the people that I talk to around this issue that this post-COVID situation has absolutely advanced the concerns of being a responsible company, about treating the earth right, about doing all the things right. So these numbers might be even better if we did this survey today, but these are already incredibly good numbers. So as opposed to some of the things you hear out there, that if this is in fact a solution in search of a problem, we got plenty of problems to solve. So I'm pretty happy with it.
Great, yeah, and some of the findings that you share, Mark, connect to research that the center has done on our sustainable market share work as well. So yeah, I think that the data really shows that consumers demand for these products and their actual willingness to purchase them is only going to continue. Caleb, to you with the future-looking question, what types of trends and challenges remain in the technology, itself?
For the technology itself, that's a good question there too. I think, again, both Marks, I really appreciate your almost revolutionary, maybe badass stance in terms of going against the sort of big centralized powers that be. I see a general trend. What this technology will unlock more or less is this sort of decentralized aspect of a blockchain network will help remove the concentration of these like data stewards, large hoarders of information, as opposed to anything else that we found usually capture up to 30% of a transaction's value. And so the sort of democratization of information, and not to get too big and meta here, but the transformation of the paradigm of data ownership to many people as opposed to a few large entities is definitely the trend I see that will impact sustainability. But for blockchain, it also represents a challenge because instead of there being one authority on, for example, food quality or any sort of standard like that, who now decides what that standard should be? How are the standards updated? These democratic processes might make things a little bit more difficult or slow to innovate. And for example, for something like energy trading, energy management, even physical borders and regional differences between one country, one city, one geography, and another can create, base issues that can't be resolved by some sort of technology, especially one that, permanently codifies things into a ledger. In order to update a governance model for that kind of network or anything like that, you really do need to have the buy-in of the participants. And so much to Mark Hanna's point earlier about scale, scaling up and keeping these sort of important visions of decentralization are two things that are possibly at odds. And that's why, to me, it's very important that the interoperability of whatever network you're on stays at the forefront of what you're doing. For example, BlockApps Strato has a RESTful API. And so even if you're using a tool of another kind, if you want to access the data within the Strato network, as long as you're properly authenticated, you can access that and use it in the way that you want. And so instead of everyone having to be on one Strato network, for example, you can be a member that uses your data the way you want, and share it with people who aren't on the network if that's something you're interested in. And so the major challenge there is basically the tension between that, but I totally agree with the sort of move away from central aggregators and stewards of everyone's information or authority, really.
Great, thank you, Caleb. And last to you, Leandro, to take us into Q&A. Would love your perspective on partnerships. You know, how do we bring more people into this work? What type of collaborations do you think are needed moving forward?
Oh, that's a great question. And as I said at the beginning, partnership is everything for us. We don't believe one single company can go the ocean, right, and do by themselves. So one tip that I would give it to anybody who's starting in project in blockchain is take a look at the ability of the company you work with to bring partners, because the solution evolves, right? And that happens, you need to have partners with you, provide you different, bring different solutions. For example, at MasterCard, we partner with IoT sensors. We partner with digitized document companies. Besides the fact that we use partners as the front end and as the industry expert to provide the solution. We don't go on the front end directly. We also have partners with us. So it's when you talk about what we can do with traceability plus payments, it's impossible not thinking that we can do it by ourselves without partners. So one thing that I've done that for many years in IT, even before blockchain, but now with blockchain, it's really nurturing this ecosystem, bring the partners, understand how they can grow, how we can help them to scale, and that's what we're doing. We have a real example here with us, with Visible. And that's what we're doing with other industries as well. So it's bringing the right companies and help them and hold hands and go, regardless of their size. Right? It's much more on, how can you create the synergy? How can help to solve this problem? Your industry and your clients. Traceability is a too broad use case if you think about it. And I can put you like a gazillion example of different partners that could help with that. Even with the payment side, we can help with all of this. With the sourcing side, we are bringing cashless experience to communities, to farmers that have never seen anything but cash, that is still waiting for the dealer to come to pay them back with no guarantee. So and of course, we don't do it by ourselves. If you go, to emerging countries, we count on partners to that. So I would say to everybody here on this panel, just don't try to do by yourself. Foster these partnerships. Take the good ones, nurturing the ecosystem, because that's the way you scale. That's the way you gain adoption. That's the way you create the, like Khalid said before, you know, you start small but dream big, and nobody can get, you know, dream that big if you don't think about partners with you.
Great. Thank you all so much. Right on time to move to our Q&A. There've been some great questions coming in. I know we're not going to be able to get to you know, all of them, but to the panelists, if you'd like to chat your contact information out, we can share that if you'd like people to be able to follow up with any direct questions. But I'm going to start with some of the ones that have been chatted in. This isn't directed to anyone in particular, so after I ask it, if someone would like to jump in, please do so. The question is, when provenance is reliant on human input, how can we ensure that the data recorded on the blockchain accurately reflects on the products being transmitted along the supply chain?
So I can kick that off. As we touched on it a little bit before, in our both solution and supply chains, the way that we validate correct information is we only record the records. We only record the records to blockchain once the next receiver in the supply chain has accepted that the information that's been submitted to them matches the physical product that they received. We do that both on a lot number basis, but then also on the case number basis. So we are measuring down to the individual case of units. And that same workflow is persistent across the informal parts of the supply chain. So we capture both transformation events, like when a whole fish is turned into 6-ounce portions, as well as consolidation, rather aggregation and disaggregation events, like a whole container of shrimp being consolidated into 10 1-pound bags that goes into a case that's then shipped onto a grocery store. And we do that both through cell phone technology, so capturing through an app, which is necessary for small scale and low connectivity environments, as well as through enterprise IT systems and tablets, which are often the interface used in warehouses, and soon we'll be doing so with Internet of Things sensors as well.
I can add to that a little too.
Yes, go ahead, Caleb.
Oh, sure. I think if Tansi was still here, she would kind of scream out a little bit at this point and raise what she said at the beginning, which is garbage in, garbage out. You know, in a former life, I was a management consultant, and we always learned it's not just about the tool. You know, blockchain is a tool, a technology, but also the people and processes that surround it. And sometimes we see with our clients, you're modernizing not just the tools, but the processes and the ways by which you actually track things like that consolidation or deconsolidation. And I think, Mark Kaplan, your point on IoT devices is important too, because increasingly, I think we're going to get data from non-human sources. It doesn't necessarily mean that the data isn't garbage, but it does come with greater frequency and more reliability than, you know, for example, one fat finger can type in. And so I'm personally hopeful that technology will help augment some of our errors and catch them through IoT connections. But again, it's really important for those devices to be able to access a blockchain network in the same way. And so that's why I'll just plug one more time, the RESTful API that Strato has is so important. For example, in our energy tracking projects, in any sort of provenance project where a machine weighs or measures something, it really needs that good access.
Sophie, it's a great question. I just want to add one thing, that this is the exact reason why we decided it wasn't just about the product, it was about the supplier. and that we felt that any supplier that was going to have input along the way, they had to be independently certified in best practices across many things, OECD, ILO, Federal Labor Association. So we start with trusting a supplier because they've already established they should be trusted. So then we rely a little bit less, but we do at this point in time through all the pilots, we have actually had UL verify that the product that went in is the product that came out, and that same product came out again and went out in it again. And it's not scalable. I don't know how many times we use the scalability word today, but and hopefully we'll accomplish that through a combination of military sampling and desktop. But it's a great question. It's an important question, and lack of this discipline would undermine everything we're all doing.
Great, thank you. I'm going to take another question going back to the conversation around circularity. So the question is, I can see how you can trace your supply chain from raw material sources through production. How would you approach traceability on the other end of circularity? Recycling an item that may get shredded or decomposed and then part of a new product. How do you handle or think about traceability when the item is deconstructed? Anyone like to tackle that one?
Sure. Well, we're right now scoping a project. As Leandro mentioned, we were talking about this just the other day, actually. For us, we're taking that packaging challenge a step further. So what we're doing is we've gotten agreement, and this is a little bit forward-looking, and I typically don't like to speak about forward-looking opportunities, but in this case, so be it. We're going to be tracing the amount of material that is recycled in our recyclable packaging. So we'll be tracing back the source of raw materials for the outer packaging that we sell the seafood in. And what that does is it informs the recyclability of that package so that we know that consumers can know that that package, while it's perceived that all plastic is recyclable, not all is. And it'll provide the same kind of information that'll help consumers make decisions about their purchase, to apply that to how they will dispose of their packaging post-use. What we want to get to is where we're working in a solution like Dell Computer with NextWave, or a TerraCycle, where our packaging can then go into a reuse system, at which point we would use we would have a serialization on the packaging, so that could be traced back all the way to the source of the raw materials to its recycled state. But we're not there yet, but we, clearly from the statement, you can understand like how we can get there.
Yeah, and if I could chime in here, it's the point is companies from many different sizes and industry segments are having an incredible hard time to measure this recycles or all of these materials. Exactly, for the question is very good because it's not kind of a physical unit, right? So when you put solutions like that, like Mark is saying, and you start to be more clear on what the data you're sharing, that helps those companies as well to achieve their targets, right? You have companies like we have really interesting targets on this waste material and recyclable material. So you can help them by creating digital measurements to what they're doing into their real production. So token digital way of sharing things, to the participants or to the actors is one of them. So we can start to measure, for example, different supplies of yours into the ones that are, achieving their goals. So and then they can also rely on the fact that is going to the blockchain, to that information shared is it's a trusted data. And then, we even avoid sort of a reconciliation process that, these companies have nowadays. So that saves some time in terms of back office efficiency, and also, reduce the cost of doing this. One of the things that when you reduce costs of things like that, use case like that, you incentivize other companies to get on board and to do this. So so that excuse of I don't do it because it's more expensive than my real production, you can just put it away. So it's extremely important to also think about the cost effectiveness of the process. Great question.
Yeah. Great. So I'm going to try to maybe sneak in 2 more in the remaining 3 minutes. So one question is, what's the potential for more consistent certifications that are independently verified versus self-reported? And do the panelists think that in the future, these will be more industry-specific certifications? So one of the panelists wants to give a quick thought on that one.
Sure. I'll just chime in. Yeah, I do. I do. I think that there will be more certifications that are more, we kind of addressed this a little bit earlier in terms of trend. But I do think that certifications are going to have to become more rigorous. Some of them are actually being challenged for their voluntary nature. I promise I'm sustainable isn't really believable. So that's happening now. I think there's merit to industry specific in the sense of, I think Mark Hanna's industry particularly versus food. But in terms of certifications, not solutions, I think certifications are relevant, specific. But I think that the approach to solving them is going to need to be cross industry. Otherwise, you won't be able to get the kind of national sustainability measurements you're going to need for some of the really, really tough problems, like ocean plastic is a cross-industry solution that needs to be addressed, and you can't do it on an industry by industry basis. So that's a little bit convoluted, but does answer the question.
Yeah, it's definitely just an incredibly tricky thing. Where do you draw the line for a certification? Is it one type of fish, for example, or is it something even more specific than that? How does that relate to another certification? What are the commonalities between it? I've seen personally, sort of an ebb and flow between specificity and then an overall taxonomy and then specificity again. And I think probably the rate of that updating will just probably happen faster and faster as we get further down in terms of figuring out what we actually care to certify versus the stuff that's impossible today, for example.
Right. So in the 1 minute left, I'm probably opening a can of worms with this question, but blockchain has been touted as being hack-proof and fraud-proof. Is it?
Oh, I can give a one-word answer.
Yes, one-word answers, popcorn
sorry,
style.
one sentence answer. A system is only secure as the weakest link in the chain. And so much to Mark Hanna's point earlier about having trusted people in his network for his project, the capability of something to be hacked is only as good as the weakest person there that might give up a password or any of the current security convenience trade-offs we make today.
Yeah, Sophia, I just want to add one thing, that I think that we're all at the beginning of this and we're all learning, and I think it was Bill Gates who said the internet is maybe overhyped right now and very underhyped for the long term. That's what I believe about blockchain. And we are learning, and none of us are the authorities on this and how to do it and how to use it. We got a lot to learn yet, from APIs, to the secure smart contract handshakes. But we're getting there. And also somebody posted in the Q&A about rising tide raises all ships. That's also true as this extends across industries and people understand the importance of it.
Great. Well, I think that's a fantastic, oh, sorry, Leandro. Yeah.
No, we're just saying it's just a new technology. Nobody should, can lie and say, well, we know what the future is going to be. But what I can, if you don't talk about blockchain, think about the architecture of a decentralized ledger technology. By definition, should be more secure than the way that we usually do nowadays with more centralized, database that you see some scandals on this side of, also it's easy when you don't have a source into just one single place from a technical perspective. So there are some good indications that it can be, can be safer, can address security, for the future. So I think, we're getting there to the yes answer.
Great. Well, I think that's a great note to, end on. And I want to thank our panelists for joining us today, a virtual round of applause. We had, at the high point, 200 people listening in. I hope you all found this as informative and interesting and eye-opening as I did. Thank you all again for joining us. I hope wherever you are that you and your families remain safe and healthy. We look forward to seeing you at another virtual CSB program in the future. And of course, I know we all are really looking forward to being back in person at Washington Square very soon. With that, thank you all so much again and have a great rest of your night. Bye, take care.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.